Episode 9, Empress of the World. Pierre stirred in his bed as he slept, not the restless movement of a nightmare, but the simple shifting of someone deep in a dream. "Your Highness! Thank goodness it's you! You must stop them! Quickly! It's improper!" whined the shrill voice of a small man with poor complexion and a ferreted face. The woman he addressed so fervently was none other than Her Highness, first saint of the one church and the greatest empress of all Valia, the Lady Ardig. She stood intimidatingly atop a small incline, with people going out of their way to give her a wide berth and bow incessantly when required to walk past her. She ignored them all. Beneath her, at the bottom of the slope, was a field of sand used for the outdoor training of guardsmen and the like. She herself was a greatly imposing figure to behold. A pair of platform boots elevated her stature, a suit of heavy silver-plate armour embroidered with gold and crimson adorning her torso, and an emerald green kilt at her waist, with a fluttering red cape fixed to her mantle. Her hair was a startling shock of white cut short and braided neatly. Her expression was near blank, two staring scarlet eyes, a dainty nose, and a mouth that looked to be little more than a thin, straight line. "I must do what now?" She looked down at the small man who had spoken to her. The tiny man looked fit to faint at her question, at the realization of what his own words had been. He flustered in a cross of bowing and spluttering. No, I mean, that is to say, they must, yes, they must, not you, of course, my lady. I meant they must stop." Ardig's expression remained completely level, though internally she marked the man for further observation. Few of her servants were brave enough to speak so openly to her. This man might yet have a promising future. She turned her attention back to the training ground below, at the sight which had ruffled the attendant. Two men stood there, one with sword drawn, who periodically charged at the other, whom himself simply stepped to the side or pirouetted away with vigour. A crowd had formed to watch the strange confrontation. Ardig's stony expression, with its fixed points that would give challenge to the visage of a statue, finally broke, as the faintest of smiles graced her lips, the smallest curving at the edges of her mouth. Let them do as they will. After all, is not the best way for men to settle a debate through strife, no? Jem Havler, vice-commander of the Royal Knights of the Realm, effortlessly jerked back from the passing stroke of the enemy blade. Across his rough, stubble-lined face spread a wolfish grin. It was a face that seemed more fitting for someone in their late 30s rather than a man in his 20s. "Ha, man! That the best you can do, boy?" He laughed triumphantly. The boy was none other than the new captain of the guard, a young lad, barely out of his youth, with well-combed golden hair and a clean-shaven face, all complemented by his silver and white uniform and a far too ornate sword. It didn't take much for the onlooking crowd to disconcert the cause of the argument. There was always a bureaucratic rivalry between the knights and the castle guard, both directly under the direct command of the Empress, both charged with her safety, and both vying to pull rank over one another. The young man's face had become puffed and sweaty. "You fiend, sir! You fiend! You will refer to me by my title, you cur!" he bellowed before once more charging at Jem with his sword held overhead, in turn leaving himself wide open. Jem laughed again before finally drawing his open blade, a far more practical and sharper-looking weapon, and parrying the incoming attack with ease. He struck back the younger man's blow with such force that the guard captain began to stumble backwards. Jem, however, strode forward. He wound up his right hand and sent it straight for a hook to the young captain's face. A cheer rose up from the crowd. The captain clutched at his face where the blow had landed, faint line of blood dripping from his now busted lip. You scoundrel! What sort of move was that?" he demanded indignantly. Jem laughed once more. "You think you can protect Our Lady with that attitude? Think every assassin will ask your permission nicely before poisoning her wine or throwing a dagger at her late at night, The captain swung wildly in Jem's direction, to little avail, Jem simply ducking under the blade, flipping his own into a backwards grip, and then ramming the pommel of the sword into the blonde-haired youth's solar plexus. The young man gasped painedly from the winding as his sword arm fell limply to one side. However, before Jem could make another move, the boy finally struck back. Despite his winding, with all his strength, the boy rammed his free elbow into Jem's crouched back, before jumping away to recover. Jem half fell forward, catching himself just short of a meeting with the floor beneath. He stood back up with a grin while rubbing his now sore back playfully. "Ha! So there is some fight in you then, boy? You shall not call me boy, you mongrel commoner!" There was a booing from the crowd at this comment. The captain reddened, hearing this. "Silence, all of you! I am the son of Avernia's highest-ranking duke, damn it! You will address me with the respect that title requires, you blasted commoners!" Jem's expression lost its joviality at this last comment. The boy captain drew up his stance, sword gripped tightly in both hands once more, his lips still drooling blood, and one eye beginning to swell from Jem's earlier assault. He charged forward with all his might towards Jem, kicking up sand as he went. But the older man had seemingly lost interest in the battle, lost interest at the mention of noble entitlement. In a single flush movement, almost too fast for the eye to see, the sword master known as Jem Havler easily stepped aside the incoming strike, before in a move much like the one just used against him moments earlier, he rammed his own elbow down with an almighty pressure against the captain's passing body. The blond boy crumpled to the floor, his face buried in the dirt, unconscious. A raucous cheer arose from the now 80 or more gathered in the crowd. Jem stared down at the now thoroughly defeated captain of the guard. "Boy, you should wash your mouth. You speak now as emissary of her lady, and you shall do so with the respect and decorum of all her people. A ruler is only as strong as those who follow them. You would do well to remember that." Another cheer of public appreciation followed this comment. Jem turned to address the crowd of watching servants and lesser guards, thanking them and then bowing like a showman. A trio of similarly white and silver-dressed guardsmen made their way through the crowd, two going to aid their fallen leader, and the third approaching Jem. "My lord, the generals and admirals have at last arrived. The meeting is to be held now. Yours and the captain's presence are requested," the guardsman said with a sidelong look at his splayed-out superior officer, and then one to the space behind Jem. Jem's followed his gaze to where he met her eyes. At once his expression changed back to one of the utmost merriment. As his wolfish grin returned in force, he bowed again, this time specifically for her. Of course, he had known she was there all along. He could sense her in a manner of speaking, but still he couldn't help but smile at her sight. "Very good. About time we went on a hunt for that blasted cannon, eh? Last place on the continent that has yet to accept the divinely ordained rulership of our great lady. You're dismissed, soldier. See what you can do to bring the cap back around in time for the briefing, eh?" Jem instructed to the messenger before lightly jogging away in Lady Ardyg's direction. He quickly made his way up the little hill to her side. "And how are we this fine day, princess?" Princess? You dare call her highness princess?" shrieked the attendant, who still stood by her side. Jem offered the short man a raised eyebrow in response. "She'll always be the princess in my eyes," he laughed casually. The attendant looked as though he might faint on the spot. She smiled a very quiet affair, but unmistakably on her usual expressionless face. "That was quite the mean thing you did to the young captain, old friend," she said in what might just have been a joking tone. "We all need to be taught a lesson sometimes," Jem said back a little sheepishly. "Then perhaps you and I should go a few rounds, then, Sir Havler," Ardig added slyly. Jem's face flushed. "Well, now, that really wouldn't be proper. Anyhow, the meeting, yes, we must head there post-haste. On that subject, how do you plan to handle things?" He had whispered these last words in a fashion that the attendant could not hear. "There is no way an army can take that blasted weapon, not without great bloodshed." Great weapon of the Eastern Alliance, a group of 4 countries, the last 4 anywhere on both the central and southern continents, who still held out against Ardyg's empire, now that Avernia had willingly joined up by choice following the Battle of Last Bridge just months ago. Their conquest of the Alliance should have been a trivial matter, until the day had come when they had eviscerated an entire forward army with a blinding white, searing pillar of light from the sky, a city's diameter and scope, that had left nothing of the forward army behind, but a crater in the ground. Ever since then the Alliance had rallied its remaining forces, an upward estimate of 70,000, to one spot, the great city of the ancients, a place of sacred temples of unknown purpose, left abandoned for centuries, the ancients being a race of people who had simply vanished thousands of years ago without a trace. It was obvious then what the source of the enemy's great weapon must have been, something left behind by a culture long gone. The question now facing Ardyg's empire was how to force a way through the last enemy army who could oppose her rule, while avoiding being blasted by this reality-breaking secret weapon in the process. Ardyg's response to Jem's question was to allow her smile to grow ever so slightly broader. It filled Jem's heart with glee to see. Ever since she had begun her conquest of the world, since she had begun to more frequently rely on her amazing magi powers, She had in turn grown ever more distant, more reserved, as though the cost of using her ability was her personality, her identity itself. But at last, around him, she would smile and even crack the odd sly remark. An army could not get through, perhaps, but a strike team, led by a certain saint, her knightly bodyguard, and their golem, well, maybe they could, no? Jem's face broke into a wild grin of its own. It had been far too long since they went on an adventure. Ha ha, milady! Oh, then allow this humble knightly bodyguard to escort you to the meeting, will you not? We've got some convincing to do if we're going to pull this one off. Jem laughed as he offered his elbow to lean upon on their way back to Ardag's palace, where a dozen marshals of her various armies and fleets awaited her every command. Pierre lazily opened his eyes. Another dream, he contemplated. Ever since the night he had had the false nightmare wherein Ardag had died on the field of battle, his dreams now seemed to move in a pattern. Every second night he would have a nightmare, ones that always ended in either Ardag or Mocker, or on one confusing occasion both, leaving him in some fashion before he would awaken with a start. On the nights in between, he would have dreams like today's, peaceful memories of a time in a life long since past. He'd begun to wonder if his acknowledgement of this pattern was in itself the very thing causing the strange occurrence. Dreams are tricky things to manage and interpret, he mused quietly to himself. He reached for his bedside notepad, now filled with a week's worth of detailed recollections. As he flipped through the pages, a selection of words was circled on each one. Ardag had short white hair, an expressionless face, an almost masculine body type, and deep crimson eyes. He dejectedly laid down the notebook, not bothering to write down today's dreams. Once again, the details had been the exact same. Even in the nightmares, the Ardag of his memories, with her subdued personality and expressionless face, differed greatly from the fun, bubbly, and caring girl who now lived in his house. He stared up at the ceiling. He had fully accepted that Mocker was a good thing for his life, and a person he wanted more than anyone else to be around all the time. But still, there's just something not right here. Just who are you, Mocker Umit? The calendar next to his bed read February 13th. He always changed it just before going to sleep. Therefore, today was the last day before Valentine's Day. Pierre sighed and threw back the covers. He had things to finish planning for tomorrow, and now time to lay about contemplating frivolous dreams.